Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Handling the Question and Answer session. Linda L. Isaacs, MD, is a graduate of Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine. She is also a longtime member of Toastmasters International, a nonprofit educational organization that teaches public speaking through a worldwide network of clubs. She has received the Distinguished Toastmaster Award, Toastmasters' highest level of educational achievement. Linda, we look forward to your presentation today. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Before I get started in my part of the discussion here, I just wanted to say thank you to my fellow presenters today. That would be Kevin Desrosiers, Valerie Chavez, and Mike Matera, and I'll be introducing all of them as we go along. But first off, I wanted to ask you what may be a very personal question. Have you ever felt like a total imposter? And have you been nervous about public speaking as a result of that? If you think about it, here's an opportunity for people to find out who you really are. You're getting in front of them, you're speaking, and then, horror of horrors, the question and answer session, where how can you prepare for that? You don't know what they're going to ask. Well, in fact, you can prepare for the question and answer session. And my experience both in Toastmasters International and in real life has helped me know how better to prepare for public speaking and for answering questions. So what I'll be talking about today then is how to prepare. First off, framing. In other words, how you think about it in your mind before you actually do the presentation. The preparation, how to handle things in the moment, and then the challenges that may come up as you interact with your audience. So first off then, I'd like to talk about framing, because I think how you think about the whole situation in your mind is 90% of the issue, at least for me. Because if I'm in front of an audience thinking about myself and thinking about how the audience is probably being critical of me, like they're a bunch of demons, then I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to have trouble remembering what I wanted to say. I'm going to have trouble answering their questions. But the reality is, first of all, your audience is not typically out to get you. I think about how I am when I'm listening to a presentation. For example, Dr. Valerie Chavez is going to be telling us about sleep hacks a little bit later in this presentation. And when I saw the title, I thought to myself, I am so glad I'm going to get to hear this lecture. She's going to give me practical tips that I can use for myself and for other people. I don't have to go research it. It's great. I'm not going to be sitting there thinking critical thoughts. I'm not a demon out to get her. And most of your audience is on your side from the very beginning because they just want to hear what you have to say. And secondly, it is really about your message. So if you focus on your message and you focus on your audience and you try to take yourself out of the picture, everybody's going to be a lot more comfortable, including you. If you think about your question and answer session then as an extension of the value of your message to your audience, then that helps you reframe it. Because the questions that they ask, first of all, it can help you clarify whether you were clear so that you can do a better job if you present the same material in the future. It also helps your audience learn the answer to what they asked. You may even learn something. So overall, the question and answer session can be of benefit to your message and your audience. And therefore, if your goal is presenting your message to your audience, it's helpful to you as well. So that's how to frame it. But then there's preparation. And the first thing to think about with preparation is the use of time. You have a certain amount of time for your lecture and a certain amount of time for question and answer sessions. Typically, you get to choose how much of each, but you need to go ahead and rehearse your presentation and have a solid idea of how much time you're going to take and how much you can give to the questions, because going over time is a great way to make yourself extremely unpopular with meeting organizers. So the use of time is very, very important here. Secondly, will you have a moderator? Will you have somebody that's interceding in effect between you and the audience? That's a good thing to know ahead of time because you'll want to talk to your moderator if you have one. You'll want to make a few decisions. Do you want to have your questions asked during the meeting, which might actually work if it's a very small group? Or do you prefer to have everything held until the end? And you may need to set some ground rules. First of all, about when you'll answer questions. But secondly, if there's any type of question that you really can't answer, but you think you might get asked those questions, as an example, as a physician talking to a lay audience, I might want to say up front that I can't give you specific advice because I would need to sit down with you as a patient to do that. So you can try to set those ground rules before, as part of your introduction and preparation. You'll want to create an introduction for your moderator or whoever's introducing you to give. You'll want to think ahead of time about the questions that you might be asked and how you would like to handle them. And then finally, think of starter questions. And what I mean by that, sometimes at a presentation, nobody says anything when you say, does anyone have any questions? And so if you have a moderator, you can provide them with some questions to ask as if they came from the audience. Or if you're speaking on your own with no moderator, you could say something along the lines of, well, many times people want to know, and then you could answer in effect a starter question, hoping that that will loosen the tongues of those who are too shy in your audience to get started. So that's preparation. What about in the moment? How are you going to handle things? First off, repeat the question, unless it's a hostile question, in which case maybe you don't want to repeat it. But in general, you want to repeat the question, first of all, to give you time to think. And secondly, because it helps the people in the back of the room know what the person in the front of the room said. Secondly, pause. Any pause that you do will seem like forever to you, but to your audience, it really just gives them a chance to catch up with you. So that pause that I just did seemed really long to me, but probably not to you. Then you want to keep your answers short in general. First of all, because other people might want to ask a question. So if you go off on a big tangent, you'll lose much of your audience. And so what you can do if giving a good answer would require a long discussion, you can just offer to meet the person afterwards or exchange email addresses to fully address what they had to say. Then you'll want to wrap up things after your question and answer session and have a very short conclusion. And here, think about, what is your goal? Do you want them to go read a paper that you wrote? Do you want them to buy your book? Do you want them to go to your website? Do you want them to sign up for a newsletter? All of these would be valid goals that you have for them, and a short conclusion at the end of your Q&A session, factoring in the use of time. Again, this is the perfect time to have that goal be clearly announced. So that's what you can do in the moment. Now, the next thing I'll talk about are the challenging situations, the things that make you go, the things that make us all dread that Q&A session. Is there going to be somebody really impossible in the audience that I don't know what to do with? So here's some tips on that. First off, you might get asked questions that you really shouldn't answer. Think about how you're going to handle those ahead of time. I've been known to say things like, I might as well pack up my medical license and send it back to Austin, Texas, as to answer that question, because that's not within the standard of care to do that. So I've been known to say things like that. What if you don't know the answer? Well, in the sciences, maybe nobody knows the answer, in which case you can certainly just say so. Some other options would be, if there's someone else in the audience that might know the answer, if it's a small group, ask them. Maybe everybody will learn something. Or you can just simply tell the person, I don't know, but I will get back to you with the answer to that question. If you want to give me your email address, I'll be happy to correspond with you about that, or with anybody else that's interested. But it's not a good idea to fake it, because people will First of all, if somebody else out there does know the answer, they'll know that you made that up. What if a question was answered in the lecture? Now here you have to decide, is the problem that you didn't explain it well, in which case your whole audience would like a long answer, or is the problem that somebody just was dozing off at that point? You'll need to decide that, because giving a long repeat of something you already said can be pretty tedious for the rest of them. So there again, either keep it short or offer to meet the person after the lecture. What about a long question or a statement? I think most of us have heard those, where the person is going on and on and on, and you can't even tell if there is a question in there. What you can do here is to, whenever they pause for breath, jump in. If there's something that you can agree with what they said, agree with it. Thank them for their contribution, move on to the next questioner. Try not to look at them again so that they don't jump up and start up again. Then finally, we have the ones that everybody dreads, the hostile people, the ones that are looking at you with that look in their eye that says that they should have been given the lecture, not you. What do you do with that one? Well, here's what I'd say there, is that first of all, it's not all that common. I've actually never had that happen to me. What I did here was, I did what I often do in life. I called up my big sister and I asked her what her experience has been. My older sister is actually a doctor as well. She worked in academic medicine for many, many years, gave a lot of lectures in a lot of settings, including at professional conferences. And she said the same thing. It's very, very rare that you have somebody that is actively hostile or difficult. And when it happens, the key point is to remember not to jump in the mud with them. Your audience's sympathies will be with you as long as you do not stoop to the level of a difficult questioner. So what you'll want to do is let them ask their question, do not repeat it, paraphrase it if you feel inclined, answer as best you can. If they said anything you can agree with it, thank them for their contribution and move on. Again, do not jump in the mud with them, or as I reminded her, my father, a Kentucky farm boy, once put it this way: never get in a pissing contest with a skunk. So with that, again, I've covered framing, I've covered preparation, what to do in the moment, and how to handle any challenges that may come your way. I'll be putting a handout that you can use in the chat window as we go along. But at this point, what we'll be doing is hearing from two different presenters who will give a short talk, give you a chance to ask questions, and then we'll have an experienced evaluator from Toastmasters give his impression of how they did with their question and answer session and their presentation as a whole. So with that, our first presenter will be an old friend of mine from a Toastmaster club in New Jersey named Mike Matera. So Mike has more than 20 years of experience as a trainer, an instructor, and a professional development coach. He's designed and taught courses on presentation skills, business writing, negotiating skills, and WordPress fundamentals. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the stage over to Mike Matera. Mike?
Thank you, Linda. Great job with the introduction. I learned a lot about framing, for example, and even though I have covered teaching to or training with hostile audiences in mind, I learned a few things that I hadn't considered. But my presentation is going to be about what to do, let's say, when you need a website. As Linda mentioned, I do teach WordPress fundamentals, and that is a type of website technology, website building technology. Now, you may have heard of WordPress, but you may not really know what it is. So in today's presentation, I'm going to explain what it is and what it is not, some common misconceptions about WordPress, as well as your other options if, let's say, you decide to go the do-it-yourself route and build your own website. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I do teach people how to do their own websites. So there's plenty of opportunity there. But let's get into, for example, your options. if you are creating a website, chances are you probably heard of Wix or Squarespace. Perhaps you've heard of another service. They're very popular. There are some hidden costs to using those, but they're certainly great options. They're great options if you really don't want to be bothered with the design of a site, but you do want to be able to control it. You want to be able to create your own content and publish it. However, there are some disadvantages. One of them is that you never quite own the site design. Whatever you create, whether it's with Wix or Squarespace, the proprietary technology to create the website is owned by Wix or Squarespace. It's not like you could take, let's say, a website that you've created with Wix or Squarespace and move it, at least not so easily. You certainly can move it. And that's something I'll talk about in just a moment. But it's not a simple process, and you will have to redesign the entire site if you do decide to move it. They're also somewhat expensive. It may not seem expensive if you're only running one website, but it's going to cost you in the neighborhood plus or minus $15 a month for a basic website. And over 12 months a year, that does add up. In the meantime, it doesn't include the cost of the domain name, which is usually another $16 or $17. And then there are some of the other costs you may run into. You may have setup fees, or you may decide to add some other kind of functionality. Both Wix and Squarespace, again, are proprietary, and that means that you're not free to do exactly what you want. Let's suppose you created a really good-looking website in either of those two technologies, and then you decided to bring on board a professional to help you augment the site, maybe add some sort of functionality. Perhaps you want to have a members-only website, or perhaps you want to sell products. Those will cost you extra money, either in terms of add-ons that you could buy from Wix or Squarespace, or you would have to hire a programmer. And even then, with Wix, you wouldn't have much leeway. There's not a whole lot that a programmer could do with that because it's a very closed-end technology. Squarespace is a little more open, but again, kind of limited because it is its own space, so to speak. And in the effort to try to avoid viruses and malicious code, the owners of both Squarespace and Wix limit what you can do, what you can add. And even if you have a professional come along, the problem is scalability. But for a small website, a personal website, a small business, perhaps you're a doctor like Linda, or you're an attorney, or perhaps you even, let's say, build sites for other people, but those are fairly simple websites, then sure, Wix or Squarespace are great. But let's think about WordPress and what that is and why so many people use it. You may or may not have heard that WordPress powers about 40% of the web. About 40% of the web, that's a lot. And that number's been growing. While growth is slowing, it's still going. But I'm talking about the free version of WordPress because there are two kinds. There is WordPress.com. Now, WordPress.com .commercial is a bit like Wix or Squarespace. You pay for the hosting and for the services provided, and you're limited in what you can do. There is a free version, but I'm not going to talk about WordPress.com very much, except to say that it is a good way to start out with WordPress because you can have a free account. You pay nothing. You can set it up and use the tools that are familiar to WordPress users, so the interface will look very similar. And later, if you ever needed to move the site, you have better chances of doing so without losing a lot if you started off with WordPress.com and you want to move to WordPress self-hosted, as we're going to call that. But I'm going to be talking about the self-hosted version of WordPress, and that would be also known as WordPress.org. There's a reason it's popular because, number one, it's very malleable. You can use it on any web hosting. If you bought hosting, let's say, from Bluehost or GoDaddy or HostGator, you would have an automatic way of installing WordPress as your website builder. It goes basically in your dashboard, and so when you log in, you can log in and work on your site from any computer. A Mac, even a tablet or your phone, you can work on your site from different gadgets. It's also, the nice thing about WordPress is the site that you build is very likely to look good on a variety of screens. Now that's true of Squarespace and Wix, but it's another reason why using WordPress as a framework is so popular. Back in the day, if you ever made websites a long time ago or you have any familiar with it, there were coding considerations. You had to consider the HTML code. So let me give you an example of what that HTML code looks like. Let's consider, for example, if we look at, okay, we're going to look at, hopefully you can see my browser. All right, so at this point, you might be able to see my browser. If you can't, you can certainly let me know in the chat area. And we're going to look at what HTML code might look like. So for example, if you ever used, let's say, Dreamweaver back in the day, then Dreamweaver would sort of look like this. Hopefully you're able to see this. If not, my apologies. I don't know if you're seeing the Dreamweaver screen. I certainly hope that you are. But HTML code can get kind of complicated. And often you might use desktop software to create HTML code. It gets tricky and it's very difficult to design a site that's going to look good on a variety of screens. So if you use WordPress, you can choose a free theme. There are lots of free themes to choose from. And you can choose free plugins to help you design your site. So that's one of the things people like about it. While you can buy premium software for WordPress, you don't absolutely need to. So your payment, your charges would be just what you pay for your hosting. And hosting can be as low as $5 a month, depending on where you get that. You can get a GoDaddy plan that's pretty bare bones, and it would still support the use of WordPress. So with your domain, maybe that's another $16 a year, $17, plus maybe $5 a month. Pretty good. You'll come in under $100 a year very easily. You also own all of the content that you create with your WordPress site. Once it's all set up and you log in, you can design visually depending on the kind of theme and plugins that you use. And because you can use free themes and free plugins, it's very easy to move a WordPress site. Or if you decide, let's say, that halfway through, you've put a lot of work in, but you're not ready to start your web business, you might shelve the project, but you could save all the work that you did. You can't do that with Wix or Squarespace unless you keep paying the money every month. So you're still going to pay rent, whereas you can cancel your hosting at any time. And therefore, you can just hold on to that project. Or let's say you had a website that you built, you ran it for 2 years. You want to use it again. You want to use the design. You want to use your hard work. You want to reuse it, that is. You can always do that with WordPress. There are free plugins that let you download the entire site fully intact, ready to upload again on another WordPress installation. There are some misconceptions about WordPress. Among them are that, for example, it's slow. It can be if you're not sure how to set it up, but there are some basic things that you can do. There are even plugins and themes that will ensure a fast website with very little to no configuration. Also, depends on the hosting that you use, but most hosting will handle WordPress fairly readily. In fact, most hosting these days uses a technology called caching. That saves information in the browsers. It saves information in the browser so that people revisiting your site are able to pull up the site fast. So I've talked a bit about WordPress. I've talked a bit about how to compare it between Squarespace and Wix. I've given you a little bit of a taste of how it works, but in a presentation such as this, it's hard to get in all the information I might like to have included. So therefore, I would like to open things up to some questions and answers. If you have questions about how to set up WordPress or how you might use it, how you might switch to it, I am all ears.
And thank you so much, Mike. And I'll mention for our audience that they can certainly come visit your website at mikematera.com, where they can get in touch with you and see other information that you have available for learning more about WordPress. I have a question about security. Do I need to worry about, with all these plugins and bits and pieces of code, is my site more likely to get hacked when I'm using WordPress?
That's a great question. And there is a pretty big chance of it if you consider that WordPress is very popular. Since there are so many people using it, of course it's going to be a target for hackers. There are plugins that you can use. There's one in particular called WordFence Security. And if you install that, the free version is powerful enough to protect you against malware. It monitors things for you. It sends you periodic emails to let you know what's happening on your server. So there are a few basic ways to secure a WordPress site, and that's certainly one of them, to install a security plugin. That's by far not the only one. And there are great YouTube videos where you can find out how to secure a WordPress site, or you could just go to wordfence.com. Free plugin, and it will secure your site and protect you against hackers. Also, keep everything up to date. WordFence will tell you to do that. But if you didn't know that already, now you do. Just keep your plugins and themes up to date. Log in regularly or have them update automatically, and that helps cut down on hacking. Other questions? Yes, Kevin.
Yes, I already have a Wix website. I like the way it's laid out. I use the free version. I get what I need out of it. Why would I want to switch to WordPress other than portability? Since I'm on the free, I can always keep it there and turn things off. And how hard is it to switch over from Wix to WordPress? Is it going to be costly? Because I don't want to learn WordPress.
I hear you. Well, if you're already using the free version of Wix, and that's something I meant to mention but neglected to mention, is that Wix has a free version, whereas Squarespace does not. You might as well stay with the free version if it's making you happy, so to speak, if you're able to do what you need to do. I see no reason to switch to WordPress because you would be opening yourself up to more complexity. I would only do so if you had, let's say, big ambitions for your website, if you wanted custom coding, if you wanted maybe to open up a store or collect user data. But if you're fine with the way your site is, no, I wouldn't even change it. I could tell you how to change it, though. If you ever did have to do it, there are a couple of ways. And since we're running low on time, if you had any familiarity at all with HTML editors, there's a free one that Microsoft allows for download. It provides for download, and it's called Expression Web 4. Used to be a high-end web tool that Microsoft put out. If you download that, there is an import website function, and you can import a Wix site into HTML form. Otherwise, though, transitioning to WordPress would be really difficult other than to go page by page and copy and paste your content. But at least if you had it maybe imported onto your desktop, it'd be a little easier. Not that easy to do, though. Squarespace is a little easier to import from. Other questions?
Yeah, you can either unmute yourself or put a question into the chat if you like. And while we're waiting, I just ask, as a busy professional, Mike, do you think that somebody like me would be better off trying to hire somebody to set up a WordPress site or to try to do it myself?
It depends on how far you want that site to go. If it's going to do secure transactions, if you absolutely need to depend on it for business purposes, it would be better to hire someone, but even then you have to be very careful. There are a lot of people who say they are WordPress developers or WordPress designers, but they may just know the basics and they may pass themselves off as professionals, just as it would be in web design in general. So you do need to be very careful and make sure you hire somebody reputable. You could go to wptavern.com. That's a really good website. And you can always post questions there because the people who frequent that tend to be WordPress professionals. You might also want to go on a Facebook group for WordPress professionals and follow the conversation for a while to see who seems legitimate. Always get different quotes. But as a busy professional, yeah, unless you plan to take an active role in running your website day in and day out, it is better to hire a professional.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much, Mike. And so at this point, we will move on with our planned presentation to have Kevin give a critique of how you did with your presentation and the question and answers. So just a little bit more about Kevin. Kevin Desrosiers is an author, a speaker, a public speaking coach. His first book, Bridge Over Adversity, True Stories about Overcoming Personal Challenges, is due out very, very soon in October. He is a two-time distinguished Toastmaster. He has won his district speech evaluation contest both times he competed. So with that, Kevin, if you'd like to comment on Mike's speech.
Thank you, Linda, and fellow guests at this meeting, especially you, Mike. Mike, I really enjoyed your presentation simply because I have a website already and it resonated with me. It made me think about a few things that I really need to think about. I'd like to talk about a few things you did well and also mention a few opportunities that you have. The first thing, I liked how when Linda asked her question, you said, great question. She asked the first question, you built her up, and that makes the audience more inclined to ask questions. And you didn't overuse it, because I have seen speakers, they say, great question, and then the next person asks a question, I really like that question, great question, and it's over, and now it's meaningless. You only used it once, and at the first question, that is a good time to use it. Another thing I liked about your presentation is you did not share your screen immediately, because too many people rely on PowerPoint and they share their screen immediately and they're talking about things that the screen really has nothing to do with. So you did a great job of sharing your screen only when you had to. And I think that's important to keep the audience's attention. Now, you do have a couple of opportunities, like all of us. No matter how well we speak, we all have opportunities. And the first one, I would have liked to have seen in your introduction some sort of comment as to how and when you would take questions. Please hold your questions till the end, or feel free to throw something in chat and I will have a moderator interrupt me so we keep the flow. But I think you really want to make sure the audience knows when to ask questions and how to ask questions. I think another opportunity, it doesn't have as much to do with your questions because I thought you answered your questions well, but I felt that your background was a little cluttered and you were a little bit cut off. There was a lot of space above your head, so we had this and we didn't see as much as you. I would have loved to see you standing up because we project better. We're better speakers when we're standing. And that way you had a few things on the wall behind you. I can't see them right now. However, they're distracting. The people try to see what those things are. You want to have as clean of a background as you possibly can. And the one thing that I think you did absolutely best is this presentation could have been highly technical, but you didn't put it there. You made it so the entire audience could understand. You brought it down to my level, the non-internet geek. And that is important because you can lose your audience quickly if they don't understand what you're saying. It goes right over their head. So now I understand what you're saying. I am in a better position to ask questions because I don't feel like an idiot because you're just talking right over my head and I'm afraid to ask a question. So you really invited questions by keeping it at a little bit lower level. So technical people would know what you're saying, but non-technical people would as well. So overall, great job. I really enjoyed it. And I will probably follow up with you on a few things that you mentioned today. Back to you, Linda.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. And I can actually reinforce some of those points because I've used Mike for technical things in the past. And one of the things I truly appreciated about him is that he does not lapse into technobabble as soon as you ask a question, that he is able to communicate. And so that has really been very valuable as far as I'm concerned. I appreciate him very much. So our next presenter is another person I appreciate very much, and that's Valerie Chavez, MD. She is a graduate of the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio and is certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine. After 8 years in a primary care clinic, she obtained functional medicine training, and she has transitioned her practice to a functional medicine one that's focused on gut health. She also cares for hospice patients as the medical director of Amedisys Hospice in Austin. And because of her experience in primary care, functional medicine, and palliative care, she's gotten a lot of practical experience with dealing with patients with insomnia. So she's been able to figure out conservative ways to do that, to help them without pharmaceuticals. And today she'll be giving us a speech explaining that, called Sleep Hacks. So Valerie, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And it is a pleasure to be here and speak to everyone, share my experience with sleep hacks. And I'm just going to share my screen now and explain about what I think are the most important aspects of getting better sleep. And these particular tips are going to be hopefully practical and conservative, as well as non-pharmacological, just because a lot of the patients that I see are already on medications, already experiencing side effects from those medications. But there are also other people who don't want to have prescription medications, especially the pediatric population. We have to be careful with those folks. And in general, I just want to let you know that I will be answering questions after the presentation, which Linda will be moderating. Next, with the allotted time, I don't have enough time to prove to you how important sleep is, but I have an idea that many of you already know how essential it is to life. It is important for us to rest in sleep, and it might also repair our bodies. But most importantly, getting sleep impacts our health. If you don't get enough sleep, then you don't feel as well. You may not think as well. You may not heal from an illness as well. And in addition to that, insomnia is so common. Now, I'd like each of you to just ask yourselves, when was the last time that you got good quality sleep? I hope that was last night, but chances are at least some of you are not getting good sleep and may have some issues with insomnia. And before I get into all of the treatment therapies that I use, I just want to review some of the basics, which include a properly functioning circadian rhythm, meaning that our bodies like to go with the rhythm and just that balance that the earth goes through with the sun and the moon. Just ask our night shift workers how well they sleep. It's very difficult to go against that kind of natural cycle. Addition to that, melatonin release. That's important to make sure that it signals our bodies that it's time to sleep. Plus, we need an appropriate time for bed. Usually after midnight is not as ideal as we would like it to be. Plus, we need deep enough sleep when some people actually get more superficial sleep, unfortunately, and we need it to be uninterrupted. Now, if you're having to say, use the restroom multiple times, that's a lot of time that you're not getting sleep. Plus, the duration needs to be long enough. And for most people, that's 7 to 9 hours. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the common instances that I see. So I'll be going through each of these one listed with a different slide. Let me start with circadian rhythm disturbances. And that has increased over the years with the advent of screens. These screens have blue lights and they're everywhere. Cell phones, computers, TVs, iPads, they produce that blue light that can inhibit our own melatonin release and also throw off our circadian rhythm balance. But there are some ways to reset that. For instance, 10 minutes of sunshine can be really helpful to kind of just reset your body first thing in the morning. But avoiding screens 2 hours before bedtime is really helpful. Now, this is not always feasible for those who are working late at night. So another option would be to wear blue light blocking glasses before bedtime. And you can get those from a lot of different websites, including Amazon. They don't have to be very expensive, but they can really block those blue light the blue lights that can interrupt sleep, especially if you're watching TV, because that usually doesn't have a blue light blocking setting. Additionally, supplementing with melatonin may help. I find that about 1 to 5 milligrams can be helpful. I like to start low and titrate up if needed. Next, and very common, is an overactive mind. I think everybody is just used to thinking all the time, and a lot of people have difficulty just kind of shutting their minds off. So one common sense hack is just avoiding stimulating or stressful activities before bedtime. That can come in the form of watching news because they don't have a lot of happy events going on there, or it can be in the form of a show. If you're watching a show where somebody's getting murdered or there's an assault, then that may not be the best before bedtime. Additionally, writing in a journal can be very helpful. You can use it either to write about your activities during the day, who made you mad, or you can use it as a to-do list for the next day, or even better, use it for a gratitude journal, things that you're grateful for, and to keep that mindset positive right before bedtime. Another option is to try visualization exercises. I like to have somebody put their hand on their heart, then hand on the abdomen, and think about a really relaxing setting using as many senses as possible, like being on the beach, looking at the moon, feeling the grains of sand under the feet, smelling the freshness of the ocean, listening to the ocean waves, or something similar. Plus, a supplement that can be helpful is L-theanine. Now, this is a green tea extract that is almost like a natural Xanax. 200 milligrams usually does it and can be taken before bedtime, but interestingly enough, can also be taken during the day, and it does not cause somnolence. Like I said, it can be used almost like a natural Xanax and can help with anxiety, but it also helps with focus and concentration, and it doesn't usually interfere with any other medications. Epsom salt baths taken before bedtime, I think, are very helpful. This is just an infusion of magnesium sulfate, and it can relax the body, possibly the mind, but if you have any aches and pains, it's fantastic. Ashwagandha. Now, this is an adaptogenic herb that is useful in people who are very chronically stressed. Now, I can usually identify those patients coming from a mile away because they just are so on edge. They need to relax, and this can be helpful for such patients. Next, caffeine. Now, we have to recognize that caffeine is a stimulant, and there are some people who are sensitive to caffeine. I usually start with asking patients to hold off on any caffeine in the afternoons or the evenings. However, if nothing else works, they may want to consider just giving up caffeine altogether. Now, I know that's a very difficult decision. People don't like to give up their coffee, but it can make a difference, and I have seen those patients. Next, nighttime urination treatment. Now, this is a common sense tactic to help with nighttime urination, avoiding food and fluids 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. Even though it's common sense, I know a lot of people still don't really correlate that issue. So they might just need a reminder about this. Additionally, irritating foods and drinks can cause a problem with needing to use the restroom often. Sugar, alcohol, and citric acid are just a few of those items that can do it. Here's another one where caffeine comes into play because it is a diuretic. And like I said, there are some people who are especially sensitive to caffeine and may need to eliminate it altogether, or at least for half of the day. Next, sleep airway issues. Now, this is something that I think needs to be evaluated in almost everyone. I've been privy to be part of a sleep airway group, which was multidisciplinary, to where I learned a lot of these issues that I did not learn about in medical school or in residency, but it's something that we do need to try to identify. And as you see in the picture, this child is sleeping with their mouth open. And that, unfortunately, is just less efficient than nasal breathing. The air is not warmed, it's not cleaned, you're not producing nitric oxide, and it can allow somebody to be in more superficial sleep than they need to be. It's easier for adults, or at least parents, to identify their kid if they have any, sorry, but the recording button just went off. Hopefully we'll record this as well, but parents can identify kids when they're sleeping with their mouth open. When it comes to adults, it can be a little trickier. Sometimes you get the benefit of having somebody complain about dry mouth in the morning, but not always. However, a simple trial of just having somebody tape their mouth closed for a week can be helpful. If it's not for a long term, you can just simply use Scotch tape and tape from the top to the bottom and put a fold underneath just in case somebody during the night needs to rip it off. That can happen if somebody's not breathing well, has a lot of nasal congestion, or all of a sudden coughs, or just becomes claustrophobic. So those are some considerations to this, but I can tell you it helps me sleep a lot better. And if somebody uses this method long-term, there are specialized tapes that can help, especially for those who have facial hair. Additionally, a sleep study can be needed for those who have obstructive sleep apnea or even just upper airway resistance syndrome. And other folks can help to identify this issue, especially those dentists looking for teeth crowding or grinding evidence, or even just an enlarged tongue. If anybody wants more information on this, there's a book called Jaws that's small and can be very helpful to find out more on this. One of the most common electrolytes that I see deficient that can make a huge difference with sleep is magnesium. Now, I like to use glycinate for sleep. About 400 milligrams to 800 milligrams can be very beneficial. Some other signs of magnesium deficiency: cramps of the muscles, headaches, constipation. You want to be careful with your forms of magnesium because, say, the citrate version can actually cause diarrhea if taken in a good amount. Next, other beneficial items include exercise. People who exercise seem to sleep better. Meditation, there are great apps for that. Additionally, emotional freedom technique, EFT, or just tapping while reciting mantras, great for not only insomnia, but depression, anxiety, PTSD. Essential oils for diffusing, like lavender. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Thank you to all those therapists who do this and help to change behavior and attitudes of sleep. And homeopathic medications, especially for those pediatric patients. For instance, there is a great homeopathic medicine, Sleep Calm for Kids, that kids 3 and under can take, especially when you don't want to use pharmacological means. But I know I presented a lot of information, and I am open for any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you so much, Valerie. That was a wonderful presentation. We do have one question, and if anyone else has some, please put them into the chat. If someone wanted to take L-theanine for insomnia as a tea, which nighttime tea would be best for insomnia, and how would that affect L-theanine dosing if you were still going to use it?
That's a great question. In general, I think because of the whole fluid issue, you really have to be careful with the amount of fluid that you consume before bedtime. So a tea is great, and they do have, some sleep time teas, but I prefer the supplement, that 200 milligram supplement, because you don't drink as much with that. I think that can be very helpful. Besides the sleep time teas, there are also some issues with quality of teas, the bags, the chemicals that are associated. So that's another issue that you have to also be diligent about if you're going to consume something that is safe for you.
Okay. All right, that's great to know. Thank you so much. The question I have would be whether if somebody comes to you and they're already on a pharmaceutical, do you try to get them off of it, or does it depend on the situation? What are the downsides of having them continue it?
That's a great question. And I do think it depends on the pharmaceutical. Now, I think that you have to fix the root problem in order to get people off of medications. And really, that's the goal in general. But I think it can also be beneficial just to make the sleep better, with hopefully the goal of getting off the medication, even though it might continue. I think we have to be reasonable with our measures and just let patients know, look, it would be great to try to get you off of medication, but we're going to do our best. It may be possible, it may not be. And going through just some reasonable understanding will help make for reasonable goals.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Another question that came in was talking about the lights in the house, the daylight temperature versus the standard 3200. I think this is funnily where it might be better to have somebody other than me moderating this one, because I'm not totally sure I under the question. I think it has to do with the color of the light and the brightness.
Yes, it does. So if 5,500 or between 5,000 and 5,500 is a daylight color of the light, so it simulates outside more versus the standard bulb, which is more of a yellowish, a cooler color and that. So it's more of an artificial coloring of light.
I can give you an answer. It's not as specific, but I know that less artificial light can be better. And with that in mind, just, maybe keeping lights on low as much as possible. If there's an issue with potential tripping, we also have plugins with small little lights that might be helpful, but I think just less exposure to light in general. I'm not an expert in the specific type of light bulbs. I do think this is an excellent question, but just to let you know, I do think less artificial light and less overall light in general. And by the way, Mike, I believe that you had a question. Did you want to ask that?
You're muted.
Yeah, it usually works better when I unmute. Very quick question. By the way, I really enjoyed your presentation. Fantastic, timely topic. Do you know whether blue light filters on like a smartphone work as opposed to the glasses? Because I need prescription glasses to see anything close.
That's a great question. I have blue light filters on my glasses, but I really like the ones with kind of the orange or the yellow tint. They seem to work a little bit better. Unfortunately, I don't have the evidence as to how much everything works, meaning the electronic devices, whether those filters work as well as they do, or, just the glasses. These I know filter some, but like I said, I do like kind of, the actual shaded ones, and they seem to just make more of a difference. I noticed that there are some people that are more sensitive than others. For instance, I had an active military person who said it made a huge difference in her sleep time. But I've also had other patients who have said, yeah, I tried it, it didn't make much of a difference. So it really depends on the person.
Great. Thank you so much. So at this point, Kevin, if you are ready, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and let us know what you thought about Valerie's presentation. Kevin?
Okay, and to everyone again, glad to be back. And Valerie, thank you for a wonderful speech. I really loved it and I learned a lot from it. So I would like to cover a couple things that you did well. And the first one is you smiled when answering the questions. And that is inviting. That helps me want to ask more questions. If somebody asks a question and you get this smirk on your face, or you look angry or stern, and you don't have that smile that you have right now, people are less apt to ask questions. Once again, they don't want to feel foolish. So that is inviting and helps people ask questions. The second thing is I liked how you engaged your audience occasionally with a question. And the question I have is, when was the last time you got a good night's sleep? Now you get us thinking, and you paused enough for us to think, and that keeps your audience engaged throughout the presentation. And now you're stimulating their minds, and that might spur some questions in their mind. I would like to offer a couple of opportunities. And the first one is, I think during the question period, we went a little bit long. We're short on time. I would have liked to have seen you look at your watch or just look down and say, you know what, we're running short on time. I'd be happy to answer questions after, but I think we need to stop now because we are really pressed against time right now. And there's not a lot of time for closing. So you have to be aware when you have a question and answer period that at some point you have to cut it. And you either have to work that out with the person moderating the questions, or you have to do it. And if they don't do it, even though they're assigned, you need to keep track of it as well and be the backup. The other thing is you are missing a hook at the beginning. And by that, I mean, you have 30 seconds to capture your audience's attention. So what you want to do is start with a question, not tell them what you're going to tell them, but say, have you ever had trouble sleeping? Or do you wake a lot during the night? Do you not feel rested when you wake up? So now you get me saying, yeah. Well, let me tell you a little bit how you can fix that. Now I am interested. I'm leaning in. So get that hook at the very beginning. And now you've got your audience in the palm of your hands. By the same token, you want at the end that challenge. You didn't challenge us to try something to help our sleep. And this was the perfect speech to leave us with a challenge and say, because you didn't have time after the questions, you never want the question to be the last thing that's said. You want a wrap-up statement. And that wrap-up statement could be, now that you know these methods, which one are you going to try? And you can stop there. It's that short, that's simple. But what I like most about your presentation is your passion. I could tell you were excited about what you were talking about. And when you're excited, I get excited. And that helps, once again, bring the audience in. So fantastic passion. Don't ever lose that. And I will turn it back to Linda because we are running short on time. Linda?
Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I think all of you can see how it is that he's won 2 evaluation contests in Toastmasters, because he gives excellent feedback and really helps you believe in yourself as he's doing it, rather than just tearing somebody down. So he's a great example of what the Toastmaster community can do for you. A few people before the presentation asked how one goes about investigating Toastmasters. You can check the Toastmasters website, toastmasters.org, and there are clubs all over the world. There are clubs that meet only online. There are lots of different opportunities there. So with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. I certainly hope that you've enjoyed it. And if you are watching this on YouTube, check the descriptions below for the contact information for all of us who have presented here today. I'll turn it back over to Morgan to finish up. Morgan?
Thank you guys so much for a great presentation. As Linda said, we will be putting this on our YouTube. So for those who were not able to join today, we'll see you there. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.